So now moving on to our guest. Vladimir Mejia is the Director of Social Media and bitres Curator at Collab Projects, which is an artist-run nonprofit organization here in Austin, which he'll be speaking about. He's a member of Ink Tank Collective, a founding member of Rossie, Dustin, and a multidisciplinary artist who works in installation, sculpture, photography, performance art, printmaking, and digital media. Vladimir uses interaction, humor, abstraction, and writing to tackle politics, race relations, generational divides, and the ever-evolving relationship between people and technology. Vladimir graduated with a BFA in studio art from here at the University of Texas at Austin. He's exhibited his work extensively in the Austin area and has also been included in shows in San Antonio, New York. In 2019, his solo exhibition, Brim, was the inaugural exhibition at Black Mountain Project, one of Austin's newest contemporary art platforms. Also in 2019, he's part of the curation of High and Lo-Fi's at a show at Collab Projects featuring work by artist Adrian Armstrong. I got a chance to see that show and it was really incredible. Oh, my notes, you're right, thank you. So yeah, the show that I got to see of Adrian Armstrong was fantastic. So while there are a lot of other things on this list of his exhibition and curatorial work, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Vlad. So please join me in welcoming Vladimir Mejia.
Hey there, thank you. Let's see, start sharing my screen here. Cool. And yeah, I'll try looking at the camera. I might look away a few times just to check my notes and stuff. But yeah, my name is Vladimir Mejia. I graduated from UT in 2014. And I'll be telling you a little bit about my work and then also the organizations I work with. And I guess just kind of figuring out how to be an artist in Austin over the last 10 years or so. So I'm just going to start off with my early work here. This is just, I'm not going to linger on this for too long just because it is high school work, but I kind of just wanted to give people a sense of where I started out from. And it was mostly two-dimensional work, lots of drawings and photography. And I guess like, as we go through this presentation, I hope you get a sense of just kind of like the evolution of the work and how I figured out what I wanted to make and what I wanted to speak to. But back then, a lot of the work was a lot about family and also just, music and, regular teenage things that you make art about at that time and age. So I'll just briefly talk about my transition to college. So like I said earlier, I'm a first generation American. So the jumping to UT was a lot for me at the time. That was the first person in my family to go to college as well. So it was kind of like a really big leap of faith, I guess, to go to art school instead of following another path. When I started going to UT, I got my first job at the Visual Arts Center just as a work study. And I mostly worked the desk at the time. So for me, working at the Visual Arts Center, a lot of the stuff I learned was about just institutional art and how to talk to artists and installers, picking people's brains, assisting with installations. I got to go, the first opening I ever worked was also the first opening I'd ever been to. So that was kind of a, just a new environment and just kind of figuring out what I was getting myself into. I got to meet a lot of cool artists there from California in the first year, Amanda Rosso and Ry Rocklin. And I was also involved with Center Space Project, which I believe is still around. And it was a really great organization to be a part in because you got to have access to a lot of the artists and ask them questions, pick their brains. And after getting that job and just kind of figuring that out, I started volunteering a lot. So that's kind of where my involvement in Collab kind of began. This is just through volunteering. My friend Chris Birch was just getting to know a lot of the people there, and he, would invite me out to openings all the time. So that was kind of my first introduction to DIY spaces. And I started kind of just, going out to the openings and realized that there was a lot of help needed. So I started volunteering my time. And that's kind of how I really got into learning about just like what it takes to run an untraditional space, and a space that, just about anybody can make was where those ideas came from. So um, Collab Projects was founded in 2010, and it was kind of just a warehouse space with shows happening every week to 2 weeks usually. Now we're more spread out, where we usually do monthly shows when things aren't closed down as they are right now. So I started volunteering there. I started learning kind of just the differences between the institutional spaces and the DIY spaces. A lot of the stuff at the Visual Arts Center was shows that were planned, years in advance, and sometimes we were doing stuff on a weekly to monthly basis, just kind of showing artists who were traveling through the country, traveling through the state and the city, and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things I really took from Collab was the idea that you should always say yes to just about everything, within reason. We did a lot of crazy projects there, and I really got to cut my teeth on just fulfilling visions that you would never expect. I remember one time just filling out the entire space with mulch, and that was a summer school show. So that was this program that we used to do, where we would take in young artists and start teaching them how to run a space. And at the same time, I was learning how to run a space. So I was kind of like involved in the administrative end of that. And then also learning alongside those young artists. And the main thing I took from it was that, anything can be done in a space if you really apply your mind to it. You just have to be willing to work with the material at hand, and ask for things. And that was a big part of summer school, and then also just Collab in general, supporting the artist's vision. And also the importance of community. A big part of Collab for me was just finding a place that was accepting to just about anybody. Basically, don't be a bigot, and allow people to be themselves in a space. And Collab Projects for me was a place where I really learned about myself and about what a community is built on in the art scene, whether that's bartending an opening or staying late at night till 4 a.m. hanging things in a space with an artist that you just met a couple days ago, and learning about their journey, their travels, pulling weeds, learning how to do lighting. Every space is a little different. Collab was a very unique space with a big yard that was also doubled as a community space. So because of that, there was a lot more hands-on involvement, and even just like making the yard look nice, making sure that the bar looked presentable, making sure that people felt like they were welcome and that they could go there and have a conversation with people after they saw a show, and not just go to a space because you feel obligated to see a show, but go to a space because you want to be a part of a community. And I think that's kind of a thread that you'll see throughout the stuff that I've done. And the stuff that the people that I've worked with is just like a lot of community oriented things. Let's see. And always like starting with a fresh slate. So the thing that I think is the most important thing in working in a DIY space or in an institutional space is that you always want to provide a fresh slate for every artist. Start clean, and then build on that to make whatever you want to do. Every space can be manipulated. And just the idea of always keep in mind that you can always reinvent a space, whether it's by constructing new walls or throwing the mulch down. We all start with nothing. So after kind of working with Collab for a bit and the Visual Arts Center, I kind of started immersing myself a bit more into my practice and applying what I was kind of taking from both of those places. So my work started kind of transitioning a lot more heavily into installation art and performance art and digital art as well. And I was using a lot of ready-made objects at the time just to afford projects. I didn't have the advantage of having a high-paying job or having the resources to pull from. So I did a lot of ready-made art, and I would use a lot of existing objects to make new objects, just because that's what I had to work with. And on top of that, like another big thing that was a big part of school for me was just kind of immersing myself in museums and films and music, and having conversations with friends late into the evenings about what we were watching, combining influences, I don't know, like Yoko Ono and Rauschenberg and Alan Kaprow with stuff like Kanye West music videos at the time, or old 90s films that we grew up watching, and just trying to bridge the gaps between those things and make something out of it, taking inspiration from those folks. This is a piece I did called Nitpicker back when I was going to UT, and it was this piece made out of latex and paint, and the idea was you picked at it, these scabs would bleed. And I remember there was this audio recording playing behind it. This piece was kind of very personal and about my relationship with my father, who I didn't grow up with. And I remember having this audio during this piece that just did not go over well, and people in the classroom laughed. It was a really weird experience, but I learned a lot from it, because I think what I took from it was that a lot of people don't share the same experiences, and sometimes you put yourself out there and things don't land how you want them to land, and that's okay. But sometimes you just have to figure out ways to relate your experiences in a more universal way. So one thing I learned from this piece was just that sometimes there's too much of giving of yourself, and you have to find ways to give, but also allow the audience to take from it as well. So when you make work, what I took from what I was doing and making was just that the work should be self-satisfying, but it should also be aware of the audience, and even when it's something personal, and at the same time not taking yourself too seriously either. So kind of making work that's just like a little bit more humorous is also okay. Let's see, is the screen still sharing? I'm not sure. Great. And at that time, I also started experimenting more with like digital tools and kind of integrating them more into my practice. So I was kind of using a lot of Photoshop at the time to just kind of create these compositions and then apply them to things like screen printing or drawing. And that kind of led into this series that I started doing called Wallpaper Wednesday. So Wallpaper Wednesday, I started around 2012, and it was, at the beginning, it was more of an exercise just to keep myself motivated to make work on a regular basis. I would go back home after the semester would finish, and I wouldn't have a lot of like art tools or space to work with. So I started kind of doing more digital-based work, where I would start combining handmade things with digital things and scanning, kind of collaging digitally, and then releasing these online for free, just so anyone could have access to them. So I kind of started thinking at that time about the phone as a space, kind of like you would consider a gallery space, and just like what advantages there were to the phone and what disadvantages there were. So just trying to make sure that the work that I was putting out on it didn't feel like you'd have to see it on a wall, but that the phone is where it was meant to be seen. And for it to be accessible was also important to me, just so kind of like the idea or the, behind a mixtape of creating art that anybody can enjoy. So once they're out there, I kind of relinquish ownership over them. And then this time period also led to a lot of collaboration. I got, again, going back to just saying yes to a lot of things. One of the groups that I got involved with early on was Ink Tank Lab at the time. They were all a little older than me, but they were people. Some of them I worked with or had in classes. We'd run into each other, and I started working with Ink Tank and just really like learning about what the commitment to being an artist was. So I was still going to school, but some people in the group were out of school, and I just kind of started assisting at first, helping like create these kind of really elaborate projects. So one of them was this installation at Up Collective at the time. You can kind of see this kind of welded framework up there, but we built a giant blanket fort on this roof of a gallery. Had a big old blanket fort party there. There was, I basically got involved because we did a 3-part series based on the belief that 2012 was going to be the last year of the world and that the apocalypse was coming. And the people in Ink Tank before I joined had this idea of doing a trilogy of shows that kind of play off this idea of the apocalypse. And I started assisting with that, and it was a very great time to just absorb and be a sponge. So I was kind of learning from my peers. I was the youngest person in the group. The real benefit of that is that everyone kind of pushed each other, and it led to a very like competitive but friendly environment where everybody was just trying to one up, you know, the last thing, and also work together on just making bigger projects. I learned about the advantage of, you know, pooling resources when you have a group of people as large as we did. It was about 13 people when it began. You could, you know, afford more supplies. You could also do bigger projects, do more elaborate installations, scale everything up. And if you talk to the right people, even nowadays, I feel like whether you're looking around Craigslist or just making friends in the neighborhood, a lot of the times I think in Austin, you could find people that are willing to allow you use of a space for a limited amount of time. So as long as you have a week or two at the very least, I think, to do something big, you know, you can always get together and do a big show if you have enough folks to work on it. And then another group that I'm a part of is Rossie Dustin. So Rossie Dustin formed at UT in 2011. We shared classes together and worked on kind of more conceptual pieces that were a bit sillier. For us, a lot of the work was, you know, it's serious, but it's also a way for us to have fun with the idea of conceptual art and institutional art. So when we started the group, one of the big pieces that we started in UT was this piece called Punk Ass Kids, which is an instructional performance piece. And the idea is that, you know, you get a vehicle, you get at least 2 people in that car, you make a playlist and you shuffle that playlist and you kind of stay in place. You have a little happening. So we were kind of thinking about, you know, what is a happening and how can we, you know, do our own version of that, like an updated version. And then, you know, Peter went on to transfer from UT, he moved to New York. I finished out school and then he moved back a few years ago. We started talking about like kind of what we could do with the piece and how we could update it. And we came to this idea of doing what we called a world tour, a Texas world tour, and taking this performative piece on the road and doing a large scale drawing throughout the state. So about 2 years ago, we kind of came up with this idea. At the end of last year, we did the first leg of it. So we drove the entire route of the lowercase d, stopping in all these small Texas towns documenting ourselves with digital cameras and disposable cameras, just kind of creating content and then regurgitating it and making it into new things. And kind of just taking on this project that I feel like is harkening back to older conceptual artists, but also trying to do something that anybody could understand. If you picked up a map, you're like, we're driving this route and we're doing this conceptual art piece, and you can do it too if you want to. So we drew up a ton of maps for this, and we did a show called the Rough Sketch Tour, where we had little remote control cars running around, and people could come and vote on whichever route they thought was the most interesting. And this is the one that we ended up landing on. And so we started doing the tour. We also started doing a lot of documentation. So this is just like a little promo video. But yeah, like a big part of it was just kind of like documenting small towns in Texas, doing conceptual art, meeting people on the road, and then taking that material and just kind of recycling it over and over again. So it's kind of like maximalist work, but it's also not meant to be like too brain heavy, I guess. And we started making these posters just to kind of promote the work. We're kind of trying to take from kind of like Rauschenberg's idea of maximalist art, and just kind of recycling our content, and then also like photography of old artists that were notable. A lot of like gas station car culture imagery, and quoting things that were just like from hip hop or from pop songs and things like that. So I think like a lot of it was also just kind of like filtering American culture through our lens and how we were seeing things on the road. We also did this small piece where we did a 2-car pack a few months back. This was at a show called Transmission that Partial Shade curated. And we decided, what if we could do it with 2 cars and they'd have a dialogue. So this is kind of a less recreatable version of it, but it's this kind of more stationary version of it where we have the cars trade songs and then kind of hang out outside, interview people, and we can kind of ask people questions about anything really. And then another thing that me and Peter worked on while we were in school was Clarkson. So Clarkson kind of started off as an online gallery in 2011, and we had this idea of using a web page as a space. And at the time, everybody that we told about this just really hated it, but we did it anyways. And we did a few different projects. This one was by Donald Carver, who's also a UT graduate. And he was a really big influence on us, just somebody who really pushed digital media as the future. That's how he saw it. And just like the idea that, a phone could be a studio, and that, you could make everything, that all you really needed was a phone to make art. So he was the first person that we did. And the way that we documented these shows were through screen recordings. So the web pages would be up temporarily, and then we'd grab a screen recording, and that screen recording would go up on YouTube. And, that's how the show lives forever. And yeah, it was also the beginning of just kind of like, for me at least, seeing the experimental use of things like screen recordings and using things like paintings as patterns and backgrounds, and just kind of like blurring the lines between what's digital and what's real in an art piece. And then I started applying those ideas to bitres. So let's see. In about 2013, I was asked to take over the curation of Collab Projects' bitres program. The idea and concept for bitres came from a local artist, Sean Ripple. It was a very simple idea, you know, give an artist the Instagram account for a month and it'll be a residency. And it's simple, but it's you know, it's such a great idea to use that as a space. And when I was asked to take it over, you know, I'd been doing Clarkson for a while. I just, you know, ran with it and just started asking artists who were performers, digital artists, folks who did like photography and untraditional kind of work to just kind of experiment with it. And everybody kind of does something a little different with it. And so there's kind of like a few examples of artists that have done it before, including Adrian Armstrong, whose show I curated last year. And that was kind of the first interaction I actually had with Adrian, was, you know, asking him to do the bit res. And so it was a great way to just kind of like find new people that were making things, and also just take a chance on somebody who, you know, might not be able to do a full on gallery show yet, but they obviously have enough interest in content to do a really cool takeover and expose people to new work and different ideas of how social media can be used. So I've been curating Collab Projects BitRes for the last about 7 years now, I guess. And it changes on a monthly basis. So if you follow us on Instagram, you can kind of see like a rotation of artists year round. And then I also started curating in physical spaces myself. So this is just an image from a show I curated called Segments at Delta Millworks a few years back. And it was just, yeah, doing a show in a millwork. So I got to start applying, you know, what I had learned through Collab and what I had learned through Ink Tank about creating spaces out of untraditional spaces and just trying to make sense of work within a wood shop, basically. And then most recently, I curated my first physical show at Collab Projects with Adrian Armstrong. It was called Highs and Lo-Fis, and just kind of dealt with ideas of depression in African American culture, and as well as, you know, just documenting friends. There was a really great music album that he created in tandem with it. And like a big thing about doing Adrian's show was that, you know, it was probably a year from the time that I proposed the show to when it actually happened. And a big part of it was just kind of, you know, vouching for an artist. So when I found Adrian's work, he hadn't done a full-on solo show yet in Austin. And I knew that there was a lot of great content in there, and that it had to be shown in some capacity. And I was asked to propose something to Collab, and I immediately, first person I asked was Adrian, and then we kind of got together and started working on a proposal and brought that to the table, and that's how this show came to be. And it was a very great, challenging experience. And the great thing about where we're at Collab now is that we've gotten to a point where we can also provide the artists resources. So we were able to provide Adrian with a stipend, and as well as a budget for materials. And, you know, we were always there to help with install, laying out, and things like that, conferring on a regular basis, doing studio visits, and just getting really like immersed in the making of a show. But it was a very rewarding experience, and it's still one of my favorite things I've gotten to work on. And the most recent show I did was the show Brim at Black Mountain Project, a local artist collective and kind of a small experimental space. So I did this show called Brim. It was kind of about also ideas of depression and memory. And I was starting to kind of like integrate things like the type of process I was using in Wallpaper Wednesday into my actual physical work. So those things started kind of blending into each other. I'm still doing kind of like the installation heavy stuff, but also integrating like instructional artwork as well into my pieces. So the shoes you see here are all like brought by viewers. So you'd go and there was this kind of prompt for you to relinquish a pair of shoes and let go. And, you know, it could be a meaningless act or it could be a very personal act if those shoes meant something to you. And you know, another thing that I was trying to do with the two-dimensional work was just trying to mimic how I was seeing the work as I was making it, and just trying to get that kind of like idea of like the computer glare and the kind of the shine that you see like on a computer screen. So these like flat pieces on the walls were also like transparencies with plexi, so they kind of reflected light as well. There you can kind of see a bit more of the Wallpaper Wednesdays kind of bleeding into the art. And then this other show was called Mi Feito, Don't Let This Time Be in Vain. And this was actually kind of jumping back, I guess, my first solo show. So this was 2016, I want to say, right before the election. I was making a lot of work that was based off things like screenshots of news programming and kind of like, I guess, voyeurism through internet. And also just like highlighting in some ways things that I felt like weren't being really talked about enough or discussed enough. I always feel that art is a way to start or continue dialogues. So a lot of the politically heavy work is meant to start a conversation. With that being said, I also don't think that, you know, art solves an issue necessarily, but I do think that it's an important thing for people to get people talking about things. So a lot of what my art is trying to do is just trying to start conversations within people and get them to talk about uncomfortable subject matter. And then also just kind of like staying true to who you are and speaking to your truth. So I can only speak to, you know, my experiences, and that's kind of what I try to impart in the work. And yeah, other than that, I guess I could talk a little bit about my current stuff. So currently still with Kill Out Projects, I'm on the board right there. And we're doing a video open call. So if you or anybody you know who's an Austin resident is interested in submitting any video art, it can be short or long, any content really. We're selecting artists and giving out $100 stipends for every video that we select. And that gets posted on our Instagram page and also our website. So it's just kind of, and you retain all ownership, of course, of your work. And the idea was just, you know, how could we, you know, help artists out during this time, especially when there's not a lot of accessible resources, while continuing our commitment to showing local work and continuing programming, even if it's not in a physical space right now. And also, I'm also co-curating with Rito Noise, Alquimia Ritmica, which is going to be a sound art show that becomes a free mixtape. All the work that we're asking for is just sound art made from unconventional objects. Then you kind of interpret that however you wish. And there's also a $100 stipend for that as well if you get selected. And yeah, I think that's it. I'll just leave these little websites up. case y'all are interested.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Vlad.
Thanks,
Yeah, I hope that didn't ramble too much.
No, I was waiting real quick to see for everyone who's out there, like we can put those links in the chat or give you guys a second to kind of, you know, copy and paste those. I see that someone did put one of them in the chat. That's so exciting. I love hearing about these calls. All right, questions, Bailey. I think you had, or yeah.
Yeah, Bailey, go ahead, and then we have several in the chat. Go ahead, Bailey.
Yes, thank you, Megan. Thank you, Erin. I'm so excited. So I remember Rolette's work in my class during the first year when he was here at UT, and it's just so exciting to see how much you've done for our community, and how you have ventured into all these different mediums and spaces is very exciting. So I have a question for you. I know my class is here, and I would love to hear from you what advice you have for our first year students, especially during this current challenging time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, but I feel like I was kind of thinking about that earlier, and I feel like because of the current climate, like all you can really do right now is immerse yourself in your work and try to have as much dialogue with your peers as you can, whether that's through Zoom meetings or like safe, socially distanced outdoor gatherings. Just because, you know, especially the first year is a lot about just figuring out, you know, do you really want to do art? And then if you do, what kind of art do you want to do? At least that's what it was for me. And a big part of figuring out, you know, what those things were just having communications with new people and like meeting new friends and kind of like talking to other people about, you know, what they wanted out of it. So I feel like right now is just a good time to immerse yourself in, you know, whether it's a film or a book that you've been meaning to watch that somebody's recommended or something. Like, I think all those things are very influential in what you want to make. And outside of that, just kind of, I guess, just keeping an open eye for residencies if there are any right now. Because if you're not tied to a location necessarily, it's also not a bad time to consider, you know, going somewhere else for a little bit and either getting paid or at least giving some amenities to some place to stay at while you make some art for a little bit.
Here's a question for Vladimir. Why stay in Austin? Both why do you choose to work in Austin, and what do you say when young artists ask you if they should move to New York or LA or stay here in Austin?
Yeah, I stayed in Austin mainly because of Collab. I had been working with those guys for almost 4 years, and I knew that I could go somewhere else where I could be part of something more satisfactory for me. I just felt like the reason I stayed was because I felt like there was a way to have an influence on the community in a positive way. And I think that, you know, for every person, it's a little different. The reason that I personally didn't go to New York or LA is that I feel that, you know, as somebody, I grew up in New York as a kid, actually. I moved to Texas in my teens. And so I definitely heavily considered going back there. But I think the reality is that it's a very expensive place. And unless you know you can afford it or are willing to put in the time to, you know, get a job out there and do that stuff, you could do a lot in Texas still. It's an expensive city, Austin, but it's still a little bit more affordable than some of those places. And I would also say that if not Austin, there's also cities like Houston and San Antonio that are really interesting right now. But I wouldn't necessarily tell somebody to stay or not stay, because I think it really just depends on what you want out of it. If you want, you know, a smaller kind of community thing where maybe you could build your own space, I think Texas is still really great for that. If you want to really try to go to those, bigger galleries, and that's your goal, then New York and LA are great places for that. If you have friends there, or if you are willing to put in the work. But I think it's different for everybody. So it's not necessarily that you should stay here. It's just if you feel like you can get something good out of it, then it's worth staying. But sometimes it's also good to change scenery as well.
How has the pandemic affected your work, given the mobile and versatile nature of your practice? You've been ahead of the curve when it comes to working remotely. How do you feel about making work in increasingly isolated times? And that's coming from someone a gentleman named Sean.
Oh man, that's that's a tough one, because I feel like I've been making less work, if I'm being honest. I've spent a lot more time these last few months just kind of reflecting and I guess doing the self-care thing. And I think there's a lot of people that need art to fulfill a need in themselves. It's hard. I don't really know how to answer that question, I guess. It's just one of those things. If art makes you happy right now, do it. And if it doesn't, then maybe it's not the thing to focus on right now. I personally was just so immersed in art before all this happened that I had to kind of take a step back. And I think that's probably going to lead, hopefully, in my mind, it always leads to better things when you take a little break. Because I think there's this belief as well that you constantly have to be making. It's good to take a little break every once in a while. Don't take too long, but allow yourself to recharge every once in a while, and then come back and see what you want to say then. Because I think what I like about art is that it can change over time, and what I made 10 years ago is not the same as now, or even what I was making 2 years ago necessarily. So you should allow yourself some freedom to change, your medium or your subject matter, if it calls to you.
So we have a couple more in the chat right now. So just to continue on that theme of self-care, Vlad, self-care, how have you been filling your time focusing on self-care? And that's from Leslie Moody Castro.
Personal questions. I've just been, I've been getting my feng shui in my home right, and I've been catching up. Like I said earlier, I've been catching up on films and books and just trying to consume art still. I think that's still important. I still want to, I'm always consuming art. I'm just not always making it. And in the back of my mind, I'm always just trying to think of, little ideas of what could be next. But I think, staying in touch with other artists in the community is great. Talking to people about things outside of art is also great, especially if they're your fellow artists, because sometimes you aren't really checking in with each other, or you're just kind of having that passing conversation. So I think, I don't know, I guess going back to the collab thing, it's just trying to maintain community is probably the best self-care I've had, and just trying to stay in touch with people. And also, even though I haven't been making art, talking to other artists about what they're making and just how they're spending their time has been really helpful.
So another question is, you mentioned that your work is about getting people and viewers to have uncomfortable conversations. So why is art your preferred method towards that goal? What is it about material culture, visual art, and media that is really conducive to dialogue in your experience? And that's from Lauren McKnight.
Mm-hmm. For me, it was just the only medium that I really felt comfortable working in. And it was just also I guess as a first generation American, it was just kind of not wanting to, just having the freedom, I guess, to be something like an artist always seemed very American. or an ideal version of that. At the same time, you know, I'm a first-gen American, so that also meant that I have a lot of I'm very like tied to my beliefs, I guess, and I'm very much have always kept up with news, and definitely have always felt this need to speak to things that I was seeing that I felt like weren't really conversations. I feel like these conversations are happening more regularly now, but and maybe that's also the reason that I've taken a pause on making the work as well, is that, you know, I was making a lot of that work because I didn't feel like the conversations were happening. And now that people are talking more about things like racial relations and uh, uh, honestly, like conservative politics and things like that, I don't feel as much of a need to speak to it. So I'm not sure if the work will continue speaking to that, but at the time, that was the only thing that I felt empowered me and made me feel like, you know, especially in Austin, which, you know, to be frank, is a very white town. It felt important for me to make that work and put it in places where people would have to see it and have to talk about it. You know, whether it was somebody's parent or a person who just hadn't really, you know, had a conversation about race in their lives because they're a 20-year-old college student.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really appreciate hearing sort of that answer and your perspective on that, Vlad. And I think it's definitely something, there's a lot of people, just the sort of honesty of that and relatability that people have to it and your experience. Let's see. Okay, so Megan, we don't have any you see in the chat. Are there other questions that people have right now? Anybody else out there? I can't see all the groups, so I'm just curious. But I do love that Megan says, I mean, it really is amazing to hear your experience and see this sort of trajectory of your work. Bailey's comments, like, definitely thank you for the courage and service. I mean, personally, I've known you for a few years and seeing you in our community and, you know, how immersed you are in it and how, you know, your role continues to grow in it. And I think it's important. And I'm glad the students get to kind of hear the experience
Thanks.
of someone coming out of, you know, this program and what you've gone on to do, and those questions about, you know, why you've decided to stay and what you've been involved with, I thought were nice answers, and just kind of, you know, what led you to your decisions and the opportunities that have come your way by being here and how you've been proactive. So I think it's been really great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, any other questions? Let's see. Can we unshare your screen real quick? I just want to see.
Oh, yeah.
Megan Shogun's here. Awesome, Megan. Good to see you. All right. Well, if there isn't anything else, I don't know if there's other housekeeping. Megan, do you know?
No, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vlad. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
I want to say thank you, and I'm so excited and proud. And
thank you.
Thank you for what you do. Keep it up.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Right. Thank you guys.
You all so much.
Thanks everyone for coming. Great to see you.
Y'all have a good one.
All right,
thank you, our team. Thank you, Aaron and Megan.
Yeah, for sure.